Welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed the previous podcast. Not sure how long this one will be, but something just came up which I haven't mentioned in the files much. I've only got one file on it out of over 500 because it's a very sensitive subject. And I have deliberately wanted to be very careful in how I approach this subject so as literally not to offend anyone, because it is a sensitive subject and it's a deeply personal subject for a lot of people, and I try my best to respect those sensitivities. It is to do with the technology that we're using, smartphones and social media, predominantly, I think for this one, more Facebook, and some other apps that have since popped up as a result of this particular thing occurring. But I think the best place for me to start with is at the beginning. Now, I should probably start by giving you a bit of background info on my background, where I came from. I was in the entertainment industry in my hometown for a long time, and I started when I was around 10 and became solidly professional around the age of 14, 15. And I was a singer and a dancer. And naturally, in the dance world, there were a lot of gays. And most of them were male. And back then, this wasn't something that anyone had an issue with, at least not in the circles that I moved in. It was something that was just sort of went without saying for some of the male dancers. It wasn't something that was bullied. It wasn't frowned on, and none of them that I have ever known ever ran into any trouble with hate. Most of them stayed in their own circles and worked and had happy, wonderful lives. And that's it. So I just wanted to let you know that, so that the information that I'm about to share with you now doesn't hit you the wrong way when I start talking about this subject. I want you to know that I did not do the research on this to try to target anybody. I was more in the midst of doing the files in general. And this particular facet of the research, this particular subject popped up, and so I did a file on it and discovered something which might be offensive to some of you. When Facebook started in 2004, naturally a large portion of the gay community came online, and they started enjoying Facebook also. And as a result, they met resistance from people in other countries. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because in their daily lives, they weren't necessarily meeting that resistance. It was only when they came into contact with a much larger cultural differentiation across the globe, that they were then exposed to hate and bullying. I'm well aware that hate crimes against the homosexual community and people of different identifying genders occurs. But I'm just trying to make a finer point here that when that community came onto social media, suddenly there was a magnification where people who were straight and didn't associate in those circles were suddenly being confronted with people who do and are, and we had this dynamic happening that wasn't necessarily a real world representation. It was something that happened as a result of these different types of communities coming into contact with each other online. That's the first point that I want to make. What I noticed over several years is that the gender identity subject spread virally via social media, whereas prior to this, it wasn't a viral phenomenon. As I've said, it was something that existed in certain communities, in certain professions, in certain walks of life, and even not, even just average everyday people were, homosexual or drag queens, or however you want to put it. They existed, but just not in a viral sense. And what I mean by that is that ideas, when they're shared en masse through virality, they spread very quickly. I also witnessed a lot of discrimination, which was made a lot easier to express through viral media online, going both ways. So many members of the homosexual community were outright hating straights, and straights were outright hating homosexual community, lesbians, all the rest of it. So it was very interesting to see this exponential sort of, explosion of conflict between, I suppose, what was perceived as normal society and a, in inverted commas, a fringe group, sort of sparring with each other, and for that minority to try and receive respect as human beings, deserving the same rights as anybody else. And I think even that goes without saying, that where there are minorities, that is the general rule, whether it is a racial minority or a female minority or a youth minority or a political minority, that is the general rule, that the minority will seek to ensure that their rights as humans are respected. So when it came onto Facebook, it kind of took front row and centre many times, and if it wasn't front row and centre, it'd be off to the left somewhere, as still a very important pocket of society that has worked very hard to ensure their rights are respected. What grew from the LGBTQ movement online, and I was there when it first started being represented with the rainbow flag. What grew from that is that, just to put this in some context, Facebook was originally only accessible to adults 16 years old and over. And originally, a 16-year-old, I think they were under 18, they needed a guardian to approve of their membership with Facebook. So when we're looking at mass exposure to information, what happened in this particular case was that 16-year-olds were exposed to what is essentially an adult concept. Now, if you look at ratings for films and television programs and even some books, you will have noticed there are things like, it's R-rated, 18 plus, or it's M for mature audiences, 15 plus, or it's just M for mature audiences, or G for general, or PG for parental guidance recommended. Okay? Social media does not come with content ratings. They have very broadly defined social media as being G-rated, general, but within that, they have allowed a lot of adult content and adult concepts, which sexual content and sexual preference content is considered to be. I understand that depending on your culture, sexual activity among teenagers can begin as young as 12, but it is generally something that, when it comes to broadcast protocols and ratings, minors are protected from adult concepts. That's why when you get certain movies on TV, they're only going to show them in a later time slot because they've got adult themes, whereas the stuff that's on before 8:30 at night is going to be more general family viewing. Okay? So then what Facebook did was they dropped the age of entry requirement to 13. And you can probably guess where I'm going with this now. But just to reiterate, it is not, I'm not coming from a place of trying to target a group of people. I'm looking at the impact that technology has on shaping people's minds. So Facebook dropped the age of entry to 13. And so we had an even younger audience being exposed to viral LGBTQI media and witnessing the fight for their rights, their fight for the right to be married, and seeing a lot of sexual content. By sexual, I mean more than just affection between gay couples. There was often a lot of soft porn on social media and videos as well. So we had a younger generation than ever before being exposed to a minority that is essentially falls under the heading of adult content, because it is to do with sexual choices, and often these sexual choices are not something that children understand or know how to navigate, and in my belief should be protected from until they are of an age where they can understand these things and identify for themselves who they are first before they are exposed to these adult concepts. Facebook very quickly became a little bit like window shopping, where children could come online and they see everything that's on offer and they don't quite understand who they are yet, what their sexual preference is, what they believe in. They haven't finished their education, and most of them don't know what they want to do with the rest of their life. But they enter the Facebook shopping mall of options. And within that shopping mall is LGBTQI community. And over on the other side, we've got music community, or their favourite pop stars, their favourite meme pages, their favourite gun pages, as is the case with American culture, which on a tangent is quite odd because there are countries that don't have guns, but our kids are exposed to gun culture anyway through Facebook. And so they were exposed to this huge shopping mall of options at a very impressionable age, extremely impressionable age. So they're not adults. They don't know who they are. They don't know how they feel. Their hormonal changes have only just started to kick in through puberty, and they're already being confronted with extremely adult concepts that require maturity and understanding to navigate and decide where they want to put it. When you put a shopping mall of information in front of children, they think they can pick and choose what they want to be. If they see that something's popular, popular, colourful, fun, where they're accepted, that sounds like a fun place to be, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's LGBTQI community or something else. It sounds like a fun thing to associate with. And children, being sponges, will naturally absorb the culture that they are fed, which is generally why there are content ratings through broadcast media to protect children from content and themes that they require a certain amount of maturity before they can be exposed to them to be able to make their own conscious decisions without influence. Then they gave them smartphones. So they could cruise this content on their own, anytime, at night before bed, in the morning, on the bus, lunchtime at school, talk to their friends, make friends online, and suddenly they're moving in circles online that are welcoming them and talking to them about these things in such a way as that they absorb it and take it on. It's very straightforward and it can't be refuted. Where there's great influence, the vulnerable will follow. It's just a fact. It's also a marketing fact, you know. Good marketers know how to get an audience. They know how to con them into buying their product. Not so long ago, I was observing something online of a young girl who was perhaps in her late teens, and she had her smartphone held up to her face, and she was speaking, but she wasn't making any sense at all. She was sort of rambling, making up sentences, mixing the words around, and perhaps she thought that this was her way of expressing herself. And she was identifying, I think, as a dog or something. And for me, I immediately recognized that for what it was, that it was influenced behavior. Because nobody without the influence chooses that behavior. Nobody ever has. In fact, in native tribes, in some countries, if you run around acting like a dog, they think you're possessed, and they get the local witch doctor out, and they have to perform some sort of sacred rite to try and get the demons out of you. So this particular individual was doing this on her smartphone. I saw it because it was being aired on a page of a previous national security worker. Am I right by saying that Sebastian Gorka used to be Intel or national security, excuse me, something of that nature in America? So he had this video of this girl, and I don't remember the exact word that he used, but he said something like filth or pathetic, or a single word that was very derogatory. And I took immediate offense to what he had said about this young girl, because he showed openly that he had absolutely no understanding of why this girl was behaving this way. He simply observed it as something that was undesirable, insane, and not worthy of concern or caring about in any way. Which I suppose is not altogether surprising from gentlemen who have worked for the United States government, regardless of the fact that it is their technology that creates these anomalies in our young people today. A lot of apps have also been created that are marketed to younger people from 13 years of age. They are still minors. And through virality and through suggestion and through influence, the LGBTQI movement grew in parallel to its virality online. So it became a viral theme in society because it was a viral theme online, where before, Facebook and smartphones, it was not a viral theme in society. I'm not saying it's good or bad for it to be either way. I'm merely noticing that its virality did not occur until social media made it viral and began influencing 13-year-olds who are technically still children with the adult concept of sexuality, sexual preference. It is not just about sex education for younger people. It is about an addition to sexual education, which is the fact that you can make a choice. When we have social networks and smartphones that are in the hands of children who are not legally fit to download the app because they do not understand the terms and conditions, being exploited by the content and the agendas of people online who want more people to join their group, we are messing with an entire generation of youth that I personally think would be very interesting to see who they would be if they had never been given a smartphone, joined social media, or seen any of these particular apps. Who would they be if they had not been exposed to adult concepts to do with sexuality, gender identity, trans, LGBTQI community movement, which essentially originally started for the purpose of securing their rights and became something which invited others to join them, including our children. It would not happen if it were not for smartphones and viral media. It simply wouldn't happen. It's obviously impossible at this point for us to actually remove all of the technology to get an idea of who anyone would be without it. But I think it's something worth considering, that whether it's a 13-year-old being exposed to gender politics and ID politics, or whether it is an adult being exposed to cross-cultural themes or people of a different race, of a different country, and the ways that we interact with this information and how we are influenced by it, it would be very interesting to see who we would be if we had never received the influence. And that is essentially what it is. When you go into a shopping mall, you are automatically being influenced and suggested to by the marketing of the products in the stores. They have a sign out front, and if the shop front looks a particular way, you're more likely to go into that shop. If they fitted the shop out in a particular sort of way, you're more likely to gravitate toward that shop and want to go there again. If what's inside the shop makes you feel a certain way, and it might not have been what you were looking for, but you just happened to stumble across it, your life might take a turn and suddenly you are interested in the things that are in this shop where you otherwise would not have been. This is the basic concept behind commercialism and consumerism. When you get viral consumerism of concepts, ideas, and adult themes being presented to 13-year-old children, we have crossed the line. regardless of whether it's to do with sexuality or how they brush their hair. We have crossed the line because 13-year-olds have the right to be protected from any and all content that may harm them. Now, harming, the definition of harm is quite vague in terms of how it is represented in the Children's Rights Charter. How do we know what's going to harm someone, you might say? Well, there are general rules about sexual content for a start. They're all over, as I said, television and film, for example. There are general rules that must be followed. Social media does not respect these rules. They are more interested in getting as many kids online as possible because there's more people. They're easier to data mine. The simple fact of it is they're not legally fit to download any apps. And any minor that has ever downloaded an app and has been allowed to by the app developers and the companies is being exploited by the companies, and the companies are overtly exploiting children by allowing them to have access to social media apps which have no rating. They have vague rules about no porn, all this sort of stuff, but there is no rating. And they are exposed to adult content. My overall point is that when we have something these days that's growing virally in society, and I mean everyday life, it is because it has gone viral on social media first. And the question that we need to ask is, what would happen if social media didn't exist? What would happen if the smartphones didn't exist? Would that still happen? It probably wouldn't. In fact, it definitely wouldn't. There's a lot of talk online about there are two very distinct groups, one that is supportive of being a support group to younger people who are questioning their sexuality. My point is I have never known young people to question their sexuality until they are old enough to be able to understand what their sexuality is. And I think we need to be very careful when we are promoting adult-themed contents to children online or online at all. I see rights groups on social media promoting adult concepts on networks where 13-year-olds are present. They don't think about the kids. They don't think about what they're being exposed to, least of all wars. But yeah, that I wanted to bring that up, and I wanted to specifically use the topic of LGBTQI and transgender identity politics and the many offshoots of that to do with different apps that kids now have access to. A lot of parents are tearing their hair out, not really quite knowing what to do. I've mentioned in a previous podcast that once children have this technology, they are abducted. It doesn't matter what they're being influenced by. The fact is they've been abducted. Their lives change. They've entered the most massive shopping mall in the world. They are walking through Bangkok at night by themselves. Anything can happen. And it is not always the case that you just need to protect them from undesirables or pedophiles or bullies. There are legitimate businesses and companies and rights groups and adult-themed organisations that are out there ready to communicate with your children without you being present and about anything that they want. It's quite insidious. It's quite sinister and insidious and very ignorant that this is actually happening with other people's children. And in defense of the parents of these children, it is most often the case that simply because Facebook advertises itself as family friendly, that most parents think that their kids are going to be fine. Well, I think we've seen over the last 18 years that our kids are not fine. They're not fine. They're dealing with things that they never had to deal with before. They're being confused by concepts that they're too young to understand. They're being exposed to violence, hostility, and bullying that they weren't exposed to before. And there's very little that seems to be being done about this. They're downloading apps that they're not legally fit to download. They're becoming gay when they might have otherwise been straight. They're becoming straight when they otherwise might have been gay. They're pretending to be a dog because they saw somebody else do it. And there's some kooky organisation out there saying, no, that's perfectly natural for your child to identify as being a dog. Well, that's not perfectly natural at all, because never before in history has that ever happened until social media promoted viral content of anything that decided to go viral. Smartphones, iPhones, apps have done more harm than good. Overtly, obviously, virally, and permanently. There's also a lot of background information that's going through the airwaves all the time on Google Images, different websites, all the social media apps, that is in the background with algorithms pulling information together, lining it up with people's individual names, birth dates, and before you know it, your 13 to 16-year-old thinks they're a dog and their new name is Fluffy, or they're 14 and they want to get an operation to become a different gender. The question is, as I said, would that happen if they weren't exposed to this technology? My bet would be probably not. So that's just a little point that I wanted to make. I think it's something worth considering if you have children, and to step back from social media and become aware of the fact that it is a shopping mall. It's a shopping mall of ideas. Your eyeballs are what's being abducted, and your children's minds are what are being fiddled with by complete and total strangers from anywhere in the world, most of whom can present themselves as professional organisations when they only got together the day before and had a discussion about starting a Facebook page, and they just got the marketing right. Our children and most of us adults have no idea who is behind these pages. We should not be taking advice from private groups on Facebook. By all means, use the social media if you really must to converse with people. But I think overall it should be an arena for people who are 18 years or older. And as I said in a previous podcast, I would even go as far as saying 21, simply because of the harmful nature of the technology and the impact that it has on mental health. Heavy suggestion, heavy marketing, heavy influence on very young people. Really honestly, probably only the United States of America could have done this so openly and proudly without considering the consequences on the younger generations. more than likely not, because they don't care. The more chaos that spins around in the world, the more they can play hero to be seen as fixing it while not fixing it, making things worse, but ultimately achieving their end game goal to automate society through iPhones. And if your kid happens to identify as a dog, well, that doesn't really matter to them as long as they grow up to earn a living and pay taxes and declare their earnings and can be tracked 24/7 via their phones. They automate the economy, they've got their consumers, and they keep making money. So straight up, they're not really concerned about the welfare and well-being of children, and they've proven it every day that a government politician posts content that is not suitable for minors on social media. They're all in violation of the rights of the child every day, all day, violating children's rights, and more often than not, violating human rights. The whole thing is a human rights violation, but I'll get into that in another podcast. Once again, this podcast is not to disrespect the LGBTQI community. It is an example that I've chosen to use, which is very topical, controversial, and popular, that most of us are aware of, that shows the impact of viral media, not just on adults but also on children, and the massive influence that is had on vulnerable people, along with how algorithms pull information together and rewire our thinking in a form of brainwashing to distort us into something other than we would otherwise be. I'm saying that the distortions, the things that we become, have not turned out to be better than what we could have otherwise been had this technology not been invented. Anyway, that's it for me for right now. Thank you for listening, and I will be back again soon.